"She's not crying, sir." The boy said it quietly, the way he said most things, not to fill space, but because the space required it. He was standing at the edge of the garden path, one hand resting on the iron gate latch, the other holding a small brown paper bag his grandfather had given him that morning with a sandwich inside. He was 10 years old, dark brown skin, close-cropped hair, wearing a navy school jacket with one button missing at the collar. His name was Samuel Otieno, and he had been coming to the Whitmore estate on Saturday mornings for 2 years, ever since his grandfather, Joseph, had taken the groundskeeper position, and Samuel had nowhere else to be on the weekends. The detective stopped walking. His name was Frank Carver. He was 47 years old, with the particular build of a man who had once been athletic and had since reached a kind of truce with his body. Broad shoulders, a slight forward lean, hair that had gone gray at the temples in a way he had never decided how to feel about. He had been walking from the main house toward his car, which was parked on the gravel drive near the front gate, and he had been doing so with the specific expression of a man who has conducted an interview he found unsatisfying and is now working out why in the privacy of his own stride. He turned and looked at the boy. "What did you say?" "She's not crying," Samuel said again. He said it without aggression, without drama, in the flat, clear tone of someone reporting a thing they observed. "Mrs. Whitmore, when she was talking to the cameras this morning, I was watching from the kitchen window. She was making the right sounds, but her eyes were dry." Carver looked at the boy for a long moment. In 22 years of detective work, he had learned to pay attention to the things that arrived from unexpected directions. He had also learned that children, particularly children who spent a lot of time watching adults and very little time talking to them, noticed things that adults had long since trained themselves not to see. "How long were you watching?" he said. "From when she came outside until when she went back in," Samuel said. "About 4 minutes. She wiped her face twice, but there was nothing on her face to wipe." Carver was quiet for a moment. The morning was bright and cold, the particular cold of an October morning in a neighborhood where the trees were old and the houses were set far back from the road. Behind him, the Whitmore house stood in the way that houses stood when they had been standing in the same place for 100 years, solidly, with the particular confidence of something that had outlasted everything around it. The front lawn was immaculate. The hedges were shaped. The gravel drive was raked. Everything looked exactly as it should look at the home of a man who had gone missing 48 hours ago. "Son," Carver said, "what's your name?" "Samuel. My grandfather is Joseph. He does the garden." "How old are you, Samuel?" 10. Carver looked back at the house. The press had gone. There had been 3 cameras and a reporter from the local station who had broadcast Eleanor Whitmore's statement at 9 that morning, the statement in which she had stood on the front steps in a dark coat and told the world that her husband, Robert Whitmore, 61 years old, founder of Whitmore Capital and one of the wealthiest men in the county, had not come home 2 nights ago, and that she was asking anyone with information to please come forward. Her voice had broken twice. She had pressed a handkerchief to her face once. Carver had been watching from 15 feet away and had noticed nothing. He looked back at the boy. "Samuel," he said carefully, "people cry differently. Some people's eyes go dry when they're in shock." "I know," Samuel said. He did not say it dismissively. He said it the way a person says "I know" when they have already thought about the thing being said to them and have an answer waiting. "My mother cried when my father left. She cried every night for almost a year, and sometimes she cried without making any sounds at all, just the tears. I know what dry eyes look like, and I know what wet eyes look like. Mrs. Whitmore's eyes were dry. Both times she wiped them." Carver looked at him. "You've been watching her for a while," he said. Not an accusation, an observation. "I watch everyone," Samuel said simply. "There's not much else to do on Saturday mornings while Grandpa works." Carver was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "Stay here. Don't go anywhere. I need to make a call." He walked 6 steps away and took out his phone. He called his partner, a woman named Detective Rosa Aguirre, who was currently running background checks on Robert Whitmore's business associates from a desk at the county precinct. "Rosa," he said, "pull everything on Eleanor Whitmore, not Robert, Eleanor. Financial records, phone records, everything going back 18 months. A pause. "Because a 10-year-old just told me something I should have noticed myself." He hung up. He walked back to where Samuel was standing. "Can I ask you something else?" Carver said. "Yes, sir." "How often do you come here on Saturdays?" "Every Saturday, since 2 years ago." "And in 2 years of Saturday mornings, have you noticed anything else? About the house, about Mr. or Mrs. Whitmore, about anyone who comes or goes?" Samuel was quiet for a moment. This was the quality Carver would remember later. The boy's silences were not empty. They were full. He was not pausing because he didn't know the answer. He was pausing because he was deciding which part of the answer to give first. "There's a man," Samuel said, "who comes on the 2nd Thursday of every month. He drives a dark green car, older model, one headlight slightly lower than the other. He never comes to the front door. He parks on the service road at the back, and he goes in through the kitchen entrance. He stays for about an hour, sometimes less." Carver felt something shift in his chest. "Does your grandfather know about this man?" "Grandpa works the front garden on Thursdays. He can't see the service road from there." A pause. "I can see it from the old storage shed. I sit there sometimes and read." "Have you seen this man recently?" Samuel thought. 2 Thursdays ago. Which would be... He calculated quietly for a moment. October 10th. Robert Whitmore had been reported missing on October 14th. 4 days after the man in the dark green car had visited through the kitchen entrance. Carver kept his face very still. "Samuel," he said, "I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it carefully. I need you to go find your grandfather right now and stay with him. Don't go near the house. Don't talk to Mrs. Whitmore. Don't tell anyone what you just told me." Samuel looked at him. "Is Mr. Whitmore dead?" The question arrived without preparation, the way children's questions sometimes did, direct, precise, aimed at the exact thing the adult in front of them was thinking. "I don't know yet," Carver said, which was the truth. "Is Mrs. Whitmore dangerous?" Carver looked at the house, then back at the boy. "I don't know that either, which is why I need you away from the house." Samuel nodded once. He shifted the paper bag with the sandwich from one hand to the other. "My grandfather is by the east wall," he said, "near the rose garden. Go." Samuel went. He walked at a pace that was not quite a run, but was faster than a walk, the particular pace of a child who has understood that something important is happening and has chosen to be useful rather than afraid. Carver watched him until he disappeared around the east corner of the house. Then Carver turned and looked at the front door of the Whitmore estate. There were things Carver did not know about Samuel Otieno at that moment, things he would learn only later, in the way investigators learned things, gradually, from different directions, assembling a picture that grew more complete with each new piece. He did not know, for instance, that Samuel had been coming to the Whitmore estate not only because his grandfather worked there, but because the alternative was a Saturday alone in the apartment on Clover Street, where he and his grandfather had lived for the past 3 years. The apartment had 2 rooms, and a kitchen and a bathroom, with a shower that ran cold for the first 4 minutes every morning. It was clean, and it was theirs, and it was, in most of the ways that mattered, a good place to live. But it was small. And Saturday mornings, when his grandfather left early to be at the estate by 7, had a particular quality of empty that Samuel had discovered in the weeks after his mother left and before his grandfather arrived, was the kind of empty that pressed on you if you sat still in it. His mother had not died. She had simply left. One morning when Samuel was 7 years old, she had put 2 bags in a car that did not belong to her and driven away with a man whose name Samuel had heard twice and remembered neither time. She had called once in the first month, and then not again. His grandfather had not spoken about her in terms of anger or grief. He had spoken about her in terms of facts, in the careful way he spoke about things that had happened that could not be changed. She made a choice, Samuel. Some choices are hard to understand. We love her anyway, and we get on. Getting on was what Joseph Otieno did. He had been getting on for 68 years, through a childhood in Western Kenya and an immigration at 22, and a wife who had died 15 years ago, and a daughter who had walked away from a good life without looking back. He got on the way certain men got on, by keeping his hands busy and his eyes open, and finding, in the small daily work of tending things, a peace that did not require explanation. Samuel had learned this from him, not in words, but in proximity. In the years of Saturday mornings watching his grandfather move through the Whitmore garden with the particular unhurried attention of a man for whom the work itself was the point, Samuel had absorbed something about the value of quiet observation. He had started bringing a book, then 2 books. He had found the old storage shed near the east wall and discovered that it was dry and slightly warm on cool mornings because of a pipe that ran beneath it, and that from its single small window you could see the service road, the kitchen entrance, and the back half of the garden without being visible from the house. He had not been hiding. He had simply found a good place to read. And because he was in a good place to read, he had seen things. He had seen the green car for the first time in September of the previous year. He had not thought much about it then. People came and went from large estates for various reasons. He had noted it the way he noted most things, the way his grandfather noted things in the garden. Factually, without judgment, because noticing was the first step to understanding, and understanding was the first step to knowing whether something required action. Over the following months, the car kept coming. Second Thursday, every month, without variation. Samuel had begun to pay closer attention. The man who drove it was always the same man. He always parked in the same place. He always went to the kitchen entrance, not the front door, not the side gate. He was always let in by Mrs. Whitmore herself. Samuel had seen this on 3 occasions when the kitchen window was visible at the right angle. The man never carried anything in. He sometimes carried a folder out. Samuel had not told his grandfather about any of this. He had not told anyone. He had simply watched and remembered and written some of it in the small notebook he kept in his jacket pocket for exactly this kind of remembering. He had not known, at the time, what he was watching. He understood it better now. Carver had interviewed Eleanor Whitmore for 40 minutes that morning. She had been composed, precise, appropriately distressed. She had told him about the last evening she had seen Robert. Thursday dinner, early to bed, she had assumed he left before dawn Friday morning for a business trip he sometimes took without telling her the full details. She had noticed his absence Friday evening when he didn't respond to her messages. She had waited until Saturday morning to call the police because she had not wanted to overreact. Everything she had told him was plausible. He thought about what the boy had said. Dry eyes. Both times she wiped them. He thought about a man in a dark green car parking on the service road on the second Thursday of every month and going in through the kitchen entrance. He thought about October 10th. 4 days before the missing persons report. He walked back to the front door and rang the bell. Eleanor Whitmore answered the door herself. She was 54 years old, tall, with the kind of careful composure that came from either decades of social performance or genuine control. And Carver, who spent his professional life distinguishing between the two, had not yet decided which. She was wearing a dark gray sweater and dark trousers. Her hair was pulled back. Her eyes, when she saw him, registered something, a small flicker, there and then gone. That could have been surprise, or could have been something that wore surprise's expression. "Detective Carver," she said, "I thought you were finished." "I had a few more questions," he said, "if you don't mind." She stepped back and let him in. The entrance hall of the Whitmore house was the kind of space that announced money without apologizing for it. A curved staircase, dark wood floors, a chandelier, 2 oil paintings on opposite walls that Carver did not know enough about art to assess, but that looked serious and old. A narrow console table near the door held a silver bowl with mail in it, a set of keys on a hook, and a thin vase with 3 white flowers that were beginning to droop at the edges. Eleanor led him to the sitting room at the front of the house. She sat in the chair she had sat in during the morning's interview. He sat across from her, in the same position as before. The room was very quiet. The morning light was coming through the tall windows at a low angle, hitting the floor in long, pale bars. "Mrs. Whitmore," Carver said, "I want to revisit something you told me this morning. You said your husband sometimes left for business without telling you the full details. Can you tell me more about that?" "Robert has various investments that require discreet travel," she said. The tense correction was smooth, almost imperceptible. Almost. "He didn't always share the specifics. I was used to it." "Did he have a regular schedule? Any predictable trips?" "Not particularly." "No one who visited him regularly? Business associates, advisors, that sort of thing?" "Robert had many business relationships. People came and went." "Anyone who visited here specifically? At the house?" A small pause. "Sometimes." "Anyone who came regularly? Monthly, perhaps?" The pause this time was slightly longer. "Not that I recall." Carver nodded slowly. He looked at the window. He looked at the 2 oil paintings on opposite walls. He looked at Eleanor Whitmore's hands, which were folded in her lap with the specific stillness of hands being kept still on purpose. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "who uses the kitchen entrance?" This time the pause had a different quality. It was not the pause of a person searching their memory. It was the pause of a person choosing a response from a set of prepared options. "Staff, sometimes," she said. "Deliveries. Anyone else?" "Not regularly." Carver looked at her. She returned his gaze with the composed patience of a woman who had spent 30 years being looked at by people in positions of authority and had learned that the way you looked back determined a great deal. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, and his voice dropped slightly, the way his voice dropped when he was moving from the preliminary stage of an interview into its actual purpose. "I want to be straightforward with you. When you spoke to the cameras this morning, I was 15 feet away. I watched your statement. I've done this work for 22 years. I've watched a lot of people in a lot of difficult situations." He paused. "A person brought something to my attention this morning that I want to give you an opportunity to address." Eleanor's hands did not move. Her expression did not change. But something behind her eyes shifted, very slightly, like a door moving a quarter inch in a frame. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said. "I think you might be," Carver said. "I'd like to ask you about your personal bank account, the one at Merchants Trust, opened 18 months ago." For the first time that morning, The composure cracked. Not visibly, not in any way that a person watching casually would have caught. But Carver was not watching casually, and in the 1/3 of a second before Eleanor Whitmore reassembled her expression, he saw it. A flash of something that was not grief and was not surprise, and was not the specific variety of alarm that innocent people felt when investigators mentioned things they did not expect. It was the alarm of a person who has just understood that a wall they believed was solid has just shown them a gap. "I have several accounts," she said carefully. "My husband manages our finances, so I'm not certain which one you mean." "The one you opened yourself," Carver said, "without Robert, in June of last year." A long pause. "I'd like to speak with my lawyer," Eleanor said, "before I answer any more questions." "That's absolutely your right," Carver said. He stood. He picked up the notepad he had set on the arm of his chair. "I'll be in touch this afternoon." He looked at her once more, steadily, with the kind of look that a man gave when he wanted the person across from him to understand that the morning's conversation was not the last conversation. "Mrs. Whitmore, if there's anything you'd like to tell me before I leave, anything at all, this is a good moment." Eleanor looked at the window. She looked at her hands. She looked at the pale bars of October light on the dark wood floor. She said nothing. "Thank you for your time," Carver said. He walked to the front door himself. He did not wait for her to show him out. He stepped out onto the front steps, and the door closed behind him, with the specific sound of a heavy door settling back into its frame. Solid, final, the sound of a house keeping its secrets inside. Carver walked to his car. He did not get in. He stood beside it with his hand on the roof and looked at the front of the house. His phone buzzed. Rosa. "Talk to me," he said. "Eleanor Whitmore née Chambers," Rosa said. "Married Robert Whitmore 31 years ago. 2 accounts in her name. The main household account, joint with Robert, normal activity, and a second account, personal, opened 18 months ago at a different bank. She's been moving money into it. Small amounts, regular intervals. Totals just under $60,000 over 18 months. Just under the reporting threshold," Carver said. "Every single transfer. Whoever advised her on the amounts knew what they were doing." Carver looked at the house. "Phone records?" "Still pulling, but I've got something else. A green 2009 Honda Civic registered to a man named Patrick Osei. He has a prior fraud conviction, 2017, served 14 months, released 2019. Since then, he's been working as a financial consultant, which, given the prior, is creative, but not illegal." "Patrick Osei," Carver said. "Does he have a connection to the Whitmores?" "Not on paper, but I'm looking." A pause. "Frank, the 60,000. It's been moving out of Eleanor's personal account in the last 3 weeks. All of it. The account is nearly empty." Carver was quiet for a moment. "To where?" "I'm working on it. Give me 30 minutes." He ended the call. He stood beside his car for a long moment, looking at the front door of the house with the heavy latch and the 3 white flowers drooping in the silver vase. He thought, $60,000 moved out in 3 weeks. He thought, a man visiting through the kitchen entrance for months. He thought, a missing person reported 4 days after the last visit. He thought, dry eyes. Both times she wiped them. He got in the car but did not start it. He sat and looked at the east corner of the house, the direction Samuel had walked. A 10-year-old boy, watching from a storage shed on Saturday mornings, had seen something that 18 months of careful concealment had been designed to keep invisible. He had seen it not because he was looking for it, but because he was paying attention to everything, the way children did when they were left alone in large spaces, with nothing to do but watch the world arrange itself around them. Carver picked up his phone again. He called the precinct and asked for a records check on all vehicles registered to Patrick Osei or associated persons. He asked for the service road behind the Whitmore estate to be secured quietly. No visible presence, no uniforms. He asked for a check on Robert Whitmore's most recent phone activity, last known location based on cell tower data, credit card usage in the last 2 weeks. He did all of this in the particular calm of a man who has just had a conversation that has reorganized the morning he thought he was having, and who understands that the next 4 hours will determine several things that cannot be undetermined. Rosa called back in 22 minutes. "The money went to a joint account," she said. "Opened 3 months ago. Patrick Osei and Eleanor Whitmore." Carver said nothing. "There's more," Rosa said. "Robert Whitmore's cell phone last pinged a tower near the Millbrook Reservoir on Thursday night, October 13th, the evening before Eleanor reported him missing." "The reservoir," Carver said. "It's 20 minutes from the estate. There's a service road that runs alongside it. Remote, especially at night." A pause. "Frank. His credit card hasn't been used since October 12th. His phone hasn't moved since the tower ping Thursday night." Carver started the car. "Get a dive team to the reservoir," he said. "Quietly. And get a warrant for Eleanor Whitmore's phone. I want her calls for the last 6 months, specifically any contact with Patrick Osei." "Already drafting it. How are we explaining probable cause?" Carver thought about a 10-year-old boy standing at a garden gate with a paper bag and a sandwich, saying she wiped her face twice and there was nothing on her face to wipe. "Witness observation," he said. "Behavioral inconsistency during public statement, and a pattern of concealed financial activity over 18 months. "That'll hold," Rosa said. "I'll have the warrant in an hour." He found Samuel and Joseph Otieno in the rose garden near the east wall, the old man kneeling beside a late-blooming plant with a pair of shears, the boy sitting on an upturned bucket with the thin paperback open on his knee. Joseph Otieno was 68 years old, lean and careful in his movements, with hands that had the particular look of hands that had worked outdoors for 40 years. He looked up when Carver approached, with the measured attention of a man who had spent a lifetime in proximity to powerful people and had learned that the arrival of police on a wealthy man's property was rarely straightforward. "Mr. Otieno," Carver said, showing his badge, "my name is Detective Carver. I'm sorry to interrupt your work." Joseph set down the shears and stood slowly. "Detective, Samuel told me you spoke with him." "He did. Your grandson is very observant." Joseph looked at Samuel, who had closed the paperback and was watching the exchange with his characteristic stillness. Something moved in the old man's face, not quite a smile, something quieter and older than a smile. "His mother's boy," Joseph said. "She noticed everything too." Carver looked at Samuel. "I have one more question," he said. "The man in the dark green car, did you ever hear his name?" Samuel thought. His eyes went slightly unfocused, the way eyes went when a person was pulling something precise from memory. "Mrs. Whitmore called him Pat once. I heard it through the kitchen window when it was open. She said, 'Pat, you're early,' and he said something I couldn't hear, and then the door closed." "Pat," Carver said. "Yes, sir. And that was in August, the second Thursday in August. I know because I had my school reading list with me that day. We were supposed to finish 2 chapters before September. August, 3rd visit before Robert Whitmore's disappearance. The planning had been going on longer than the money trail even suggested." Carver looked at Joseph. "Mr. Otieno, I'm going to need you and Samuel to stay in this garden for a while longer. Officers will be arriving shortly. I want you both visible, away from the house." Joseph looked at him steadily. Is something wrong with Mrs. Whitmore? We're looking into some things, Carver said carefully. I'd appreciate your patience. Joseph nodded once. He did not ask anything further. He picked up his shears and turned back to the rosebush, which was in need of attention regardless of what was happening at the house, and which he was going to give that attention to, because that was what he did. Carver turned to go. Then Samuel's voice came from behind him. Detective Carver. He stopped. Yes. The car. The dark green one. It was here this morning. Carver turned slowly. This morning. Before the cameras came, maybe 6:45. It was on the service road. It didn't stay long. Maybe 10 minutes. I saw it when I arrived with Grandpa. Carver looked at the boy. Then he looked at the house. His mind moved quickly through the sequence. Robert Whitmore, missing since Thursday. Eleanor's statement to the press at 9 this morning. Patrick Osei's car at the service road at 6:45 this morning, before the cameras arrived. Coordinating the story, he thought. Making sure every detail matched before she stood in front of those cameras. Making sure there was nothing she had forgotten to say, and nothing she was going to say that contradicted what he might say if someone eventually found him and asked. Samuel, he said. Did you see the driver? Yes, sir. He didn't get out of the car, but I saw his face through the window when he turned to reverse out. He was maybe 40, dark skin, short beard, and the car had the headlight lower on the left side. Carver looked at the boy for a long moment. In 22 years, he had worked with witnesses who had advanced degrees, who had been trained to observe, who had been positioned specifically to see and record. He had worked with surveillance footage and forensic analysts and experts of various kinds. He had assembled evidence from 100 different directions on 100 different cases. He had never had a witness like this. Thank you, Samuel, he said. Is it helpful? Samuel asked. He asked it the way he asked everything, directly, without performing the question. Yes, Carver said. It's very helpful. Okay. Samuel opened his paperback. I'll be here if you need anything else. The warrant came through at 12:47. Rosa served it at the front door, while Carver came around the back with 2 officers through the service entrance, the same entrance Patrick Osei had been using for 18 months, the entrance that opened into the kitchen where Eleanor Whitmore had said goodbye to a man named Pat on second Thursdays and pulled the door closed behind him. Eleanor was in the sitting room when they came in. She was on the phone. She ended the call when she saw them, quickly, the specific quickness of a person who has been waiting for something to happen and has just understood it is happening now. She stood up. Her expression had changed from the morning's careful composure to something flatter and more private, the face of a person who has decided, in the last few minutes, to stop pretending. Mrs. Whitmore, Carver said, I'm going to need you to come with us. She looked at him. Her eyes, as they had been all morning, were dry. My husband, she said. Have you found him? The question had the particular quality of a question asked by someone who already knew the answer and was asking it to see how the answer was going to be delivered. We have divers at the Millbrook Reservoir, Carver said. We'll know more shortly. Eleanor Whitmore looked at the window. She looked at the 2 oil paintings on opposite walls. She looked at the pale bars of October light on the dark wood floor. She looked at all of these things in the ordered sequence of a person taking a last inventory of a room they were about to leave for a very long time. Then she said quietly, I want my lawyer. That's your right, Carver said. She nodded. She picked up her phone from the chair beside her. She walked with them to the front door without being asked to hurry, without speaking, without any of the distress she had performed for the cameras 3 hours earlier. Her shoes were quiet on the dark wood floor. The chandelier above the entrance hall lit her from above, catching the gray at her temples, the set of her jaw, the particular blankness of a face that has decided there is nothing further to perform. Her eyes were dry. They had been dry all morning. A 10-year-old boy had noticed, and had said so to a detective walking to his car, and the detective had almost kept walking. Almost. Patrick Osei was found at a motel 40 miles from the county at 6:30 that evening. Carver was not present for the arrest. He was at the reservoir, standing 20 feet from the waterline in the last of the afternoon light, watching the dive team work. The water was dark and still and cold, the kind of reservoir that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, the kind of water that kept things. The forensic team had already photographed and documented the tire impressions on the unpaved service road that ran alongside the bank. The impressions matched the width of a 2009 Honda Civic's rear axle. When the call came through that Osei had been found, Carver was told 3 things in rapid succession. The motel was paid for in cash, there was a packed bag in the room, and inside the bag was a one-way bus ticket departing at 8 for a city 3 states away. There was also $12,000 in cash, which was not the $60,000 that had moved out of Eleanor's account, which meant the other 48 had gone somewhere that would take the financial investigators several more weeks to locate. Osei was brought in. His lawyer arrived before the first question was asked. The lawyer said very little. Osei said nothing useful. But the phone records Rosa had pulled told a story that did not require either of them to speak. 41 calls between Osei's number and Eleanor's personal phone in the 6 months prior to October 14th. 11 of those calls concentrated in the 5 days immediately before Robert's disappearance, and the last of them at 11:14 on the night of October 13th. The night the cell tower had placed Robert Whitmore's phone near the reservoir. The dive team found Robert Whitmore at 4:17 that afternoon, 40 meters from the service road. The medical examiner's initial assessment would take several days to formally confirm, but the circumstances were not ambiguous. The reservoir bank was accessible by car. The water at that depth was cold enough to preserve certain kinds of evidence. Robert Whitmore had not gone for a swim. It was not a complicated case, as these things went. It was a case that had been carefully arranged to look like a disappearance and would eventually have been arranged to look like something else. A man who had walked away from his life, which happened, which was a thing investigators sometimes eventually accepted when the evidence didn't point elsewhere. Eleanor had been careful. 18 months of careful. The money moved in amounts below the threshold. The man who visited through the kitchen entrance. The press statement with the right sounds, and the practiced handkerchief, and the eyes that stayed dry while the face performed everything else. The one thing she had not arranged for was a 10-year-old boy in a storage shed who had nowhere else to be on Saturday mornings and had spent 2 years watching the world organize itself around him from a window no one had thought to worry about. Carver went back to the estate that evening to collect the last of his notes. The front door was sealed with police tape. The gravel drive had been marked with cones where the forensic team had worked. The chandelier in the entrance hall was visible through the tall front window, still lit, the kind of detail that happened when a house was vacated quickly and no one thought to turn off the lights. He found Samuel and Joseph in the service entrance parking area, waiting for a ride. Joseph was sitting on a low stone wall with his hat in his hands. Samuel was standing beside him, backpack on, the paperback visible in the outer pocket. They had apparently been asked to stay until a second round of questions was completed, and they had stayed, quietly, without complaint, in the way of people who understood that being useful sometimes meant simply remaining present. "Mr. Otieno," Carver said, "I'm sorry you've had to wait. You're free to go." Joseph nodded. He stood slowly, placed his hat back on his head. He looked at Carver with the steady eyes of a man who had seen the end of the day arrive in an unexpected shape and was deciding how to carry it. "Mr. Whitmore," Joseph said, He was a fair man. He paid on time. He remembered my name." "Yes," Carver said. There was nothing else to say to that. Joseph nodded once more. He put his hand briefly on Samuel's shoulder. "Come, Samuel." Samuel fell in beside his grandfather. Then he stopped and turned back to Carver. "Detective," he said. "Yes. Did I do the right thing? Telling you?" Carver looked at him. He thought about the 40 minutes he had spent interviewing Eleanor Whitmore that morning without noticing what a 10-year-old had noticed from a kitchen window. He thought about the almost of walking to his car. He thought about a man at the bottom of a reservoir who had been there since Thursday night and who might have stayed there considerably longer if a child in a navy jacket had decided that what he'd seen was not his business to say. "Yes," Carver said. "You did exactly the right thing." Samuel considered this for a moment. Then, "I wasn't sure anyone would listen." "I almost didn't," Carver said. He said it honestly, because the boy deserved an honest answer. "But I did." Samuel nodded slowly, the nod of someone receiving a confirmation they had already half expected. He turned and walked with his grandfather toward the road, the paperback in his outer pocket, his backpack on both shoulders in the way his grandfather had taught him. Both straps, always, so your hands stayed free. Carver watched them until they reached the road and turned south and disappeared behind the estate's border hedge. The evening was settling in around the property, the October dark arriving early the way it did in this part of the country, erasing the edges of things first and then the things themselves. He turned back to the house with its lights still on inside and its police tape on the door and its chandelier burning in the empty entrance hall, and he stood there for a moment in the cooling air, thinking about the particular shape of attention. Not a talent, not a gift, a practice, a daily decision to look at what was in front of you and take it seriously, to not walk past what your eyes were already registering, to not dismiss what arrived from unexpected directions simply because the direction was unexpected. He thought about a boy sitting in a storage shed with a paperback and a window, watching a service road on second Thursdays because he was somewhere he was allowed to be, and paying attention because he did not know how not to. He took out his notebook and uncapped his pen and wrote 3 words at the top of a new page, the way he always began a case summary. Then he crossed them out and wrote something different. He wrote, "Pay attention." He looked at it. Then he closed the notebook and walked to his car in the last of the October light. The case moved in the careful way that cases moved when the documentation was thorough, and the cooperation, when it eventually came, was complete. Patrick Osei decided, 6 weeks into the process, that cooperation was preferable to its alternative, and what he told the investigators filled in the operational details that the physical evidence had not been able to provide on its own. The financial investigators located the remaining $48,000 in an account in a name that was neither Osei's nor Eleanor's, in a state neither of them had any obvious connection to, which was a level of planning that the lead investigator described in her notes as suggesting this had not been improvised. Eleanor Whitmore did not cooperate. She sat across from her lawyers in a series of rooms and said nothing that was useful and some things that were not true. And when the trial came, she sat across from a jury of 12 people and heard them return a verdict she had spent 18 months trying to prevent. Carver was present for the verdict. He sat in the 3rd row of the gallery, which was where he always sat when he attended verdicts. Far enough back to be a witness rather than a participant, close enough to see the faces. He watched Eleanor Whitmore's face when the foreman read the finding. Her eyes were dry. He had stopped being surprised by this. He drove back to the precinct afterward and found Rosa at her desk with 2 coffees and an expression that was the expression she wore when she had been thinking about something and was ready to say it. "The case file was formally closed this morning," she said. She slid one of the coffees toward him. I read through the initial lead documentation. And? There's a line. She opened the folder on her desk and pointed to a paragraph near the top of the third page. Initial lead provided by civilian witness, age 10. Carver looked at the line. 10 years old, Rosa said. 10, Carver confirmed. What was he doing there? Watching, Carver said. Just watching. Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, We should all watch like that. Yes, Carver said. We should. He drank his coffee. Outside the precinct window, the city moved in its ordinary way. People walking, cars passing, a delivery truck double-parked at a corner, a woman at a bus stop reading something on her phone, a man unlocking the door of a dry cleaner's that had been in that location since before either of them had worked in this building. All of it visible. All of it there to be seen by anyone who decided to look. Samuel Otieno had decided to look. He had been deciding it every Saturday morning for 2 years, from a storage shed with a warm pipe running under it and a window that faced a service road, with a paperback on his knee and nothing pressing him to pay attention to anything in particular. And so he had paid attention to everything. He was still at the same school. He was still reading 2 grade levels above his class. His grandfather still took him to the Whitmore estate on Saturday mornings, not to the estate itself, which had been sold by the estate lawyers 6 months after the trial, but to the road that ran beside it, where they sometimes stopped to look at the old border hedge and the roof of the house visible above it, before walking on to a park half a mile further, where Joseph fed the ducks and Samuel read, and the morning passed quietly between them. He had not stopped watching. He had simply been watching different things, and the world, or at least a small but significant corner of it, was different because a 10-year-old boy with nowhere better to be on a Saturday morning had chosen, without knowing the consequences of the choice, to notice what was in front of him, to take it seriously, to say something.